Before we begin, and most of you don't know me and I don't know you, I thought a bit of a personal word of background might be useful just to establish some sort of context this afternoon. And by the way, I look very much forward to our question and answer time. Those are always the best parts of any sort of academic or professional colloquia. So I'm looking forward to that. And before you, as a handout, I don't intend to turn this into a class, but it might help you follow the skeleton of my thinking and suggest recommended reading, maybe in germane areas. Personally, I'm a product of both seminary as well as PhD training, so I appreciate what goes on at an institution like this. Partial disclosure, I was forced to transfer from Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia to Catholic University of America in the 1980s to complete PhD work because the library at Westminster caught fire, by which some, let's say, 50,000 comic books were destroyed. And the tragic loss of these volumes prevented me from finishing my dissertation. So I'm grateful, though, that I could find what I need. Sorry, I thought I'd inject a little bit of levity there. In any rate, I'm being a little playful, not truthful. This, however, is true. After doctoral studies, I did do public policy work in Washington, D.C. in the area of criminal justice. So ethics and issues of justice, as Dr. Lena was suggesting, have always been important. One particular season that for me was formative was doing public policy on Capitol Hill. And it was there that I was running continually into Roman Catholics who took their faith seriously. That was a first for me. And it was my impression that those who took their faith seriously were having the biggest impact on Capitol Hill in terms of a public faith. For the last 25 years or so, as Dr. Leno has indicated, I've taught at the university level, at Taylor University in Indiana and Union University. I was a visiting fellow at, has anybody ever heard of Berry College in North Georgia? In the honors program for a year, and was at Bryan for a season. In the last 5 years, I've been associated with two, what shall we call them? Post-undergraduate fellows programs. Dr. Leno identified one, the John Jay Institute, which is in Philadelphia, another associated with the National Fellows Initiative. Both of those fellows programs are oriented toward, faith-based and oriented toward the marketplace and the challenges of a public faith. And presently I'm associated with the Acton Institute, as Dr. Leno indicated. One of the joys that I have right now, in addition to other responsibilities, is to help edit this massive volume by, does anybody read Abraham Kuyper in Baptist circles? Yes, Common Grace, which was recently translated into English, but which style is almost unreadable because it's so rigid and wooden. So there's a lot of editorial work that needs to be done there. I'm having a ball doing that. That has been part of my, shall we say, responsibilities attached to Acton, for which I'm grateful. Today's topic, then, really is born out not only of my journey and calling, but I would also say a deep concern for what may be a widespread, even universal misunderstanding about the church's mandate. A misunderstanding, and I'll try to be charitable, mind you, not among theological revisionists, but among conservatives and orthodox. What is the church's mandate in this life? I pose that question, and the thoughts and our discussion time will revolve around that. What is the church's mandate for the present life? Think with me for a few moments. Why are we here? Why are we not simply raptured away from earthly responsibility post-conversion? If, in fact, fellowship with the Lord is the highest goal. I mean, after all, it's purest apart from our experience on earth, is it not? In 45 years of being a Christian, I can say that I never remember, my memory may be failing me, but I never remember once hearing a sermon on the high calling of the marketplace, or the holy calling of business, or of serving God by cleaning toilets, or the high calling of being a butcher, a baker, or a candlestick maker, or of being nurses, doctors, or drivers of hearses? Do we hear about going on so-called mission trips all the time? Do most people think that the pastorate or church work is a higher calling than the calling to the marketplace? Yes, probably. Do we exalt missions in faraway places? Of course, that's the calling card, the bread and butter, is it not, of evangelicalism. But do we ever hear of the high calling of being an economist, a social worker, a psychologist, a medical professional, a lawyer, a businessman, a policy analyst? Probably not. We Protestants, every bit as much as Catholics, suffer from our own sacred versus secular dichotomy in elevating full-time Christian work, which, by the way, does not exist, over the marketplace, whereby nearly all of us as Christians are called to the marketplace. Our sermons, our teaching, our Bible classes, and I'm afraid much of our seminary curricula largely confirm this orientation. And again, I'm a product of seminary training, so I am grateful for it. And I serve full-time with Campus Crusade for Christ. Well, I guess they call themselves, what, Cru now? Yeah, in the 1970s. So I'm appreciative of these functions and these seasons of life. So let it not be said that somehow Daryl is up there throwing stones at a glass house. And for those of you who are ready to pick up a stone, drop it. Question, in your particular congregations and parishes where you serve and worship, how many people are called to the workplace? What percentage? Just whether your congregation consists of 100, 1,000, or I'm in the Metroplex, so 10,000, perhaps, probably nearly 100% of the congregation's life is called to the marketplace. Yes, a few truly are called to pastoral or church work, but virtually all of our congregants are called to the marketplace. I ask you, does standard teaching and preaching bear that out, mirror that? Probably not. Recently, I read a volume titled How the Church Fails Businessmen. It's on the back of your handout there, published by Erdman's in 2012, authored by a business consultant and educator. The author has this to write. Let me quote him. I believe that the church has largely failed Christians who struggle daily to live out their faith commitments in the places of employment. Countless believers find the church oddly indifferent to marketplace challenges. The church has done little or nothing to equip them for the marketplace. Most believers perceive the church and its clergy as preoccupied with the private sphere of life, disinterested in the ethical stresses of the weekday work. I'm inclined to agree. The church is virtually silent on the subject of work, and the truth is that most clergy have never spent a significant season, a protracted season in the workplace or the marketplace. Not only do they have little experience, which, by the way, in my view, would allow them to identify with their parishioners or congregants, even in a better way, they probably have had little or no seminary training. And what's more, those so-called faith and work movements or ministries that have emerged, say, over the last 20 years or so, usually they tend to be what? Lay-led, that is, they're bottom-up versus top-down in trajectory. The church's leadership, then, I would humbly submit before you this afternoon, has the responsibility, yes, a holy responsibility, to recognize that its teaching is geared toward private as opposed to public, and to confess that therein it has failed both itself and society as a whole. The solution, then, it seems to me, at least part of the solution, must come from seminaries and divinity schools. And this is, I think, as it should be, because we turn to theology, not, I heard that in Dr. Lena's opening remarks, when we're wrestling with matters of how to relate faith to the world. So the topic at hand, then, this afternoon is why the church's call is to public life. Theologically, I see several reasons. I'm simply going to identify 3 for us today. Virtue, stewardship, and vocation, part 2. Does anyone, Trey Dimsdale excluded, know what Acton Institute's motto is? Anybody here? Want to try? What is the motto of the Acton Institute? Anybody? No? All right. Toward a free and virtuous society. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no such thing as a free society without people who are virtuous. Sorry for the bad news. Neither sound economic policy, nor policy directives, nor good government can cure a sick society unless the medicine of moral renewal enters the hearts and minds of both rich and poor, upper and lower classes. Without virtue, that is, without the moral impulse, without the ability to reflect morally and make moral judgments, by the way, which contemporary culture is loath to do, is it not? It's only a matter of time before society collapses, something that you and I have not experienced in our lifetimes, have we? At which point, were that ever to happen, matters of economic theory, policy, and the market disappear or become irrelevant as the state more and more comes to rule our lives. Now, let me be clear, I'm not some apocalypticist. I'm not an alarmist. My eschatology is not that of fundamentalist dispensationalism. I despise what someone has called lifeboat theology, whereby it's thought, well, since culture is anyway going to hell in a handbasket, why rearrange chairs on a sinking ship? Okay, that's not helpful. While that sort of nonsense, yes, sells books, and I'm sure there's a 48th installment of Left Behind being prepared for the publisher somewhere, and I'm sure there's a Left Behind castle in the Rocky Mountains. I'm sure that's true. And while apocalypticists would remove us from society, sorry, I'm being cheeky here, and that's unforgivable, it seems to me that mainstream historic Christian theology calls us not away, but to the marketplace and to society with all its sin and anguish as stewards. It requires responsible participation in the culture. So withdrawal, and I'm not suggesting that that sort of mindset would ever exist in an environment like Southwestern, withdrawal is never an option, even when we're being persecuted for our faith. Being stewards of the culture to which we're called means we create, we develop, we shape, we extend human culture using our gifts, our talents, our vision. And when that's done in community, that is particularly exciting. Why? We do it based on the image of God within, sharing his likeness. At the same time, however, being stewards of the culture required that we be students of the culture in the sense that we sense this ebb and flow of human and historical developments affecting societies, affecting American culture. There is no guarantee, where am I going with this thought? It is here. There is no guarantee that a free society remains free. That is to say, democracy, in which many, at least not faith-based communities, many place their trust, democracy is procedural. It's instrumental. It does not automatically renew itself from within. Those inhabiting a democracy, they must be renewing, must they not, in order for it to work. In fact, in the historical record, there's indication when its moral bearings, the sum of anarchy followed by some form of totalitarian arrangement. When Alexis de Tocqueville visited America early in the 19th century and praised the young nation for its religious freedom, he reflected, however, with sobriety on the democratic tendency. Rule by the people, he said, he worried actually, could result in what he called a, do you recall? Tyranny of the majority. If the masses are given to a prostituted and wrong view of freedom, then their laws, their government, their institutions will reflect that and bear that out, will they not? They reflect then that tyranny. And whether, brothers and sisters, whether a tyranny is majoritarian or minoritarian, people are not truly free. Some form of enslavement ensues. I was a fan of, as a Protestant evangelical, I was a fan of John Paul II. He was prolific in his pontificate. Every 2 or 3 years, he would come out with a major cultural statement through his encyclicals, which I thought were again and again timely. Very often, John Paul spoke of the need for an ordered liberty, a freedom not toward license, but toward truth. And of course, John Paul was making this sort of critique post fall of the curtain, Iron Curtain. He came out of it as a Pole. He knew it firsthand. And in his 1993 encyclical, The Splendor of Truth, he worried about what he called, these are his words, an alliance of democracy and ethical relativism, which would remove any sure moral reference point from the political and social life, and on a deeper level, I'm still quoting him, make the acknowledgement of truth impossible. Close quote. Gentle ladies and gentlemen, do you get the impression today that it's getting harder and harder to stand for the truth in the public sphere? A democracy without values, he warned, readily turns into open or thinly disguised totalitarianism. Now, my concern, and some of you, I can read your thoughts, and I know how you're reacting or overreacting. My concern about the totalitarian tendency is not just theoretical. I mentioned I'm not alarmist, but I married into recent German history. My wife is a German citizen. We met in Canada. We were doing, believe it or not, street theater and pantomime back in the 1970s. I came to the faith at the tail end of the Jesus movement, and God was doing the ridiculous out there in my generation. So yeah, that's how we met. Okay. And so we went to what is still West Germany in the 1980s for the first years of our marriage, not knowing how long we'd be there. That's neither here nor there, but that's just a bit of context. But my father-in-law, who died 35 years ago, spent all 5 years of the Second World War working for the German Bundeswehr, right? German army, specifically working for the railroad. Guess what his function was for 5 years in Poland working for the German Bundeswehr? He was a railroad car switcher. Now, those of us who are younger or who aren't interested in recent European history probably could care less. But by marriage, I tied into something that leaves me a little tender, yeah, and exercises my sense of justice and ethics. Yeah, I can't run from that. That's God's calling on my life, yeah. And again, in our lifetime, we've never experienced something like that, have we? And I'm not suggesting that we're around the corner from something like that. But I would say that movements require social and cultural preparation. My first chief point, then, needs summary. There is no free society without virtuous people. Hence, first things first, no, it won't be easy. Yes, we'll be lambasted, but we cannot live in the fear of what culture thinks. Now, I'm not suggesting we have to be out there Bible thumping and preaching on street corners. That's not my argument today. My argument is that there will be a cost to representing the truth. But our lives, not just our words, but our lives must manifest that. And that means cultural participation. And based on theological and moral conviction, that is, based on our cultural mandate, which is theologically and scripturally validated through the doctrines of creation, providence, redemption, and incarnation, we are stewards of human culture. That is my second point, part 3. An important focus of Acton's work is economics and principled use of resources. I don't know if you've ever been to any Acton Institute function. I encourage you strongly to do that. And even if you haven't, you probably know that their interest is wise and principled use of resources based on Christian faith. Economic issues entail, first and foremost, a stewarding of resources, yes? To properly understand this task, we must begin then, I would argue, as Christians, with the doctrines of creation and providence. Our mandate is based on that, based on the imago Dei, yes, his likeness. So we therefore develop, shape, extend what God has called into being. That is stewardship. That's grounds for stewardship. And according to the Genesis narrative, of course, humankind is to what? Develop as co-regents all that God has created. Principles of stewardship furthermore derive from divine providence, by which we understand that all things are sustained continually by the sovereign Lord, the Creator. Providence means the Creator is ceaselessly operative in human affairs. That means, in fact, that in this age's consummation, at the eschaton, creation will not simply be thrown on some cosmic ash heap. Rather, it will continue, albeit transformed. The new heavens and the new earth, of which Peter and the Apocalypse speak, do not cease to be. They will continue, albeit in a transformed and glorified state. And by the way, I think that gives importance then to a doctrine of accountability and a doctrine of judgment according to works. Now, no, I'm not suggesting what you think I am. Judgment according to works. Judgment according to works presumes that our work and our works are exceedingly valuable and that they count in a lasting way. I don't know about you, but that, to me, is thrilling. In addition, important New Testament texts underscoring the reality of Christ as both Creator and Redeemer also need mentioning. The writer to the Hebrews, for example, you're familiar with the prologue, tells the reader that the Son made the universe and sustains things by the word of his power. Think about those words. He sustains all things. And Paul, emphatically in Colossians 1, it's one of my favorite New Testament texts, declares that by the Son, all things were created in heaven and on earth, the material and the non-material, the visible and the non-visible, the invisible, and that not only were all things created through him, but they were what? Created for him. That's right. And in the same pericope, Paul repeats the staggering truth. All things have been reconciled unto Christ. All things, ladies and gentlemen, in the Greek means all things. Okay, I thought that was funny. What is also typically absent from contemporary teaching and preaching is a fuller awareness of another doctrine, that of incarnation. Consider how the Creator interacts with and transforms his creation. The prologue to the fourth gospel indicates that. You're familiar with the text. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh. The word, logos, of course, can be rendered based on the context, word, communication, logic, reason. The logos is divine. The Word was incarnated. The flesh, divine, took on flesh and dwelt among us. As the enfleshment, here's my argument here, as the enfleshment of the Creator, the Word continues to advertise himself to the world. How does he do it? Through us. Question: by what standards does he advertise himself in the world that he himself created? Aren't you glad that God didn't communicate in a, shall we say, second-rate fashion? He gave his best. And we should too, incarnating his life in our cultural surroundings. By the way, what kind of Jesus did for those, 25 years of apprenticing as a carpenter before he entered that short window of time to do messianic ministry? Almost 30 years apprenticing as a carpenter, huh? Do you think Jesus made, do you think the Prince of Glory made shoddy furniture? I find in the last 25, 30 years in a mostly liberal arts context, I'm surprised how few Christians aspire to be journalists, writers, policy analysts, entering gatekeeping functions where communication is important. I'm struck as if it's a lower or not strategic calling. God incarnate is first and foremost the Logos, the Word, the master communicator. Therefore, then, I would say, let us be master communicators in and to the world. But that's not my emphasis. I'm just on a bit of a rant here, forgive me. But I do want to draw down to the last point. Stewarding of creation, then, requires that we steward all of culture's resources. That lies at the heart of the doctrines of creation, providence, redemption, and incarnation. And before I move to the last point, vocation, I just wanted to draw attention to wisdom literature and the well-known the parable of the talents recorded in Matthew 25. Surely you'll sense things that I don't, and I'd love to bat it about in our question and answer time. But some things strike me as noteworthy. For example, the master gives differing gifts to stewards with differing talents. He calls them, this is the language, he entrusts them, he gives them a charge over various domains. Interestingly, in terms of time, eschatology, the master goes away for an unspecified time, and the stewards are not viewing it as being imminent. How about that? What matters is not the gift or talent per se or the number, but how the steward uses it. Further, the master doesn't require from the steward what he or she doesn't possess, only that each person use that talent and ability given. Interestingly, I find two of the three stewards, receive commendation and rewards for their work or service, the language of well done. What happens then? Guess what? They're given more. They're given more responsibility. They're given more with which to invest. Ha-ha! And part of that is simply investing more. No investing or multiplying of talents, that is to say, no stepping out in faith displeases the master. What does displease him is an unwillingness to take risk or invest. Note the third student, the one-talent steward. He's clearly worried about risk and change, so he doesn't invest. And interestingly, that Jesus indicates that he had a distorted view of the master. The one-talent steward doesn't lose his gift during the master's absence. He simply does nothing with it. However, not to use or invest what we have in the end is to lose it. And it's on that note that the parable ends, interestingly. So far from being this sort of entertaining, harmless story, this parable really is a spear thrust in the side, is it not? It's a slap in the face, teaching us a lot about not just how much do you have, but what are you doing with what you've been given. Well, part 4. This brings us to the third of the 3 reasons I'm suggesting for the church's mandate to public life, and that's vocatio, vocation. And I'm going to make this brief in order that we have time for question and answer. I submit, I earlier suggested that Protestants, just as Roman Catholics, erect their own sacred secular dichotomies, and I think that's a tendency of every single generation to which we must be sensitive. Which is why then the Protestant and specifically Lutheran breakthrough in the early 16th century, that is the discovery of justification by faith, was parallel to but informed another important theological discovery. If all, track with me, if all are priests before God and not simply a few, then all are called to serve him and their fellow human beings in specific avenues through their work. So this meant in Luther's day, if you're a farmer, if you're a cobbler, if you're a parent, if you're a ruler, even if you're a jailer, a henchman, or a soldier, you were called to that particular station. And these callings, these vocations, were declared by Luther and the Reformers to be every bit as high as that of the priests and the monks, who typically what? They withdrew from society in order to preserve their holiness, did they not? And it was against that Luther was reacting. And by the way, I think Christian responses to things like the Benedict option, about which we hear much, they're important, but I think they need qualification. Myself, I prefer the Kuyper option. Abraham Kuyper defines vocations quite simply as this: life's task. I like that. Vocation entails our employment, our work, our occupation, while it transcends those, even when it includes them. Vocation may entail work that's paid or unpaid, for profit or non-profit. Vocation is our life's task. It's comprehensive. Every believer has a vocational calling, one that utilizes the individual's gifts and abilities and burdens. Let me ask you, why work? I mean, let's get basic here. Why do humans labor? Because we just have to? Because of bare bones necessity? Because of the paycheck? Oh, I'll bet we must work because of sin and the fall. You know what Dorothy Sayers' response to that question was in her classic Creed or Chaos? Because we're created to work based on the Imago Dei. And in her day, just as in ours, she was dissatisfied with Christians' attitude toward the marketplace. Either they were so distressed by the mundane nature of the daily routine, or they simply found such utter sheer dissatisfaction in their work. As Sayers rightly intuited, often that dissatisfaction comes from a wrong view of work. Why? There's an absence or a lack of the awareness of calling or vocation. Right now, I'm doing a lot of reading in wisdom literature, and specifically that most vexing book, Ecclesiastes. And I think that's probably going to be my next book, a practical commentary on Ecclesiastes. And specifically, I want to focus on the writer's addressing of work. As you well know, all human activity is viewed as meaningless, is it not, in Ecclesiastes? But work is viewed both as meaningless and meaningful. And my beef with a lot of Old Testament commentators is that they ignore what I hold to be a sub-theme, an important sub-theme, running throughout all of Ecclesiastes. It's a refrain, and it's a refrain of joy, receiving from the hand of God those gifts of God. And one of those gifts of God is satisfaction in our work. Wow. 6 times in Ecclesiastes, this refrain of satisfaction, receiving it as a gift from God, occurs. My view is that the writer's, Kohelet's literary strategy is this. He's not saying, that's not his position, all is meaningless, all is vanity, it's all in the toilet. He's saying all human activity and striving, apart from acknowledgement of the Creator and receiving as a gift what comes to us, that is meaningless. Might there then be some sort of apologetic through juxtaposition that's going on throughout? That's my hunch. I wouldn't lay my life on it, but I'm looking forward to thinking about it a lot more. I want to drop you that on you. I suggested, and here with I close, I suggested earlier that the pastor's plight is that often he's never been able to spend a significant adult season of life working in the marketplace. And I would say that has repercussions for how he might be able, and I'm among Southern Baptists, maybe there's some she's here that are heading into the pulpit, and that's fine too. But my guess is that does not help us as we train others, since almost everybody, 100% of our congregation, is called to the marketplace. What is needed then, I'm arguing this afternoon, is a rediscovery of the Christian doctrine of creation. A rediscovery that transforms the lives of the laity who comprise most of the body of Christ. It transforms the laity because it furnishes the layperson with a sense of life task, as Kuyper said. And it equips the layperson theologically on the basis of the doctrines of creation, providence, redemption, and incarnation. In closing, let me just suggest a number of things that thinking vocationally entails, and then I look forward to our question and answer time. It entails a basic awareness that we are made in the image or likeness of God, and therefore, as Dorothy Sayers argued, created for work. That work has intrinsic worth and value. It's not just a part of the fall. Yes, I'm not denying that it's not affected by the fall, but it's not based on the fall. And therefore, it has reward in and of itself. Vocation entails an awareness that we're placed in and not out of the world in particular social cultural contexts. It assumes that the meeting of genuine human need around us is what neighbor love truly is. And that in serving others, we render service and therefore worship to God? Can we say that in going to work, that is my worship to God? Is that part of our worship? Can we do it like that? And finally, the benefits of thinking vocationally need emphasizing. They include, hear me, a freedom from comparing ourselves with others and becoming people pleasers. Freedom from conformity to the world and its standards. Freedom from what someone has called the tyranny of the urgent. Remember that book? Freedom from hectic, purposeless lifestyle. Freedom from a false, sacred, secular dichotomy to which I alluded. Freedom from a misguided sense of duty, but also freedom toward discernment, wisdom, and contentment. Why is the church called to public life? I've given you 3 reasons today: virtue, stewardship, and vocation. May you, men and women, as equippers of the body of Christ, whether presently or in the future, help your congregations to rediscover what is a central Christian doctrine, that of vocation, which undergirds a public faith, and thereby may you be part of a reform movement of the 21st century. I pray that for you. Blessings to you. Thank you very much.